So today we will talk about job outsourcing. It is an extremely important and controversial topic. Very, very difficult to discuss, extremely emotionally charged. I will try to be as politically correct, but also as scientifically accurate as possible. And I apologize in advance. I will be primarily talking about it from the perspective of the United States. So I'm talking about so-called rich countries that are afraid that jobs are leaving the United States, Canada, the European Union, and are going to Mexico or China or whatever other countries those jobs are fleeing to. So the reasonable questions for today are why companies move production overseas, who wins and who loses when that happens, and then also how can a government curb or limit job outsourcing? And when the government does it, who wins, who loses, and how much? And I will talk about both positives and negatives of job outsourcing. By no means will I be saying that job outsourcing is good or that it's bad. So I will be saying that, yes, there are pros and cons, and we need to look at who wins and who loses and how much is won and lost. So I will start with a simple question. So here is a dollar, US dollar, right? $1 with George Washington. So Americans spend these green pieces of paper in the United States, right? And you understand that part of it is going overseas. So part of it is going for products and services labeled made in the United States. So the products and services produced by Americans in the United States. And part of every dollar spent in the United States goes for goods made overseas. Like, for example, this phone here was made, I assume it's a Samsung, so probably made in Korea. So when I bought it, part of my dollars went to Korea. But then obviously some things that I buy, like, I don't know, I bought some milk this morning. And so that milk obviously is made in the United States. So that would be for the United States. So first, let's talk about the perfect scenario of every dollar spent in the United States. What fraction should be spent in the ideal world? Like if you were the king of the universe and you wanted the United States the best. So you are acting in the interest of the United States. And so you're waving your magic wand and you're distributing what portion of this piece of paper goes each time to the United States and overseas. So what portion of all spending by American consumers should be going overseas and what portion should be staying in the United States? I assume you would not agree that 100% of every dollar should be spent on American goods. I mean, sometimes we want to buy maybe, I don't know, Italian wine or maybe, I don't know, German cars or something like that. So, but what portion would be optimal to be spent in the United States and what portion would be going overseas?
I still think 60% should be something that is ideal to stay in the United States,
Okay.
like on the products and goods made in the US.
So 60 in the US and 40 goes overseas. Very good. Okay, so that's, I put that in the comments. So you believe that not quite half and half, a little bit more should be spent for American goods and products, but 40% going overseas is fine. Okay, very good. How about this? So of that 40 cents that will be going overseas, what portion should go to China? And I'll use China here because in the United States, it's all of the concern. So nobody worries about jobs going to India, but somehow everybody worries about jobs going to China. China is perceived as an adversary. So of the 40 cents, what would be the optimal? Like, I guess we are fine with at least some Chinese products, like, you know, this cup maybe, or is it too much? Should that 40 cents all go to Japan and Germany, but nothing to China?
Like 5 to 10%, 5%, maybe like 5 to 10%, it's fine because cheap labor and cheap goods are still
5 to China. So basically you're saying 60 stays in the US, 40 goes overseas, and of that 40, about 5 goes to China.
Yeah.
Very good, very good. Okay, let's see what others are thinking here. So we have, very good comments. So 80-20, 70-30. Oh, somebody says actually 70 should go overseas. Very good. Okay, 60, 70, 60, 55, 60, 70, 70, 70, 80, 60. So it appears that most of you guys think that Americans should be spending to half or up to 80% of everything that they spend. So somewhere between half and 80% should be spending on American, and then about 30 to 50% should go overseas. And of that, about 20%, 10% or so should go to China. Very, very good. Now, my next question is, what do you think actually happens? So you gave me the perfect scenario. Yukta, actually, you seem to be about in the middle of everybody's estimates. So you said in the perfect world, 60% should stay in the United States, 40% should go for foreign goods and services, of which about 5 should go to China. What do you think really happens? Of every dollar spent in the United States, what portion goes overseas, do you think? Like everything that Americans buy, products, services, goods, what portion do you think goes overseas in reality?
Mm.
Is it more than you wish or less? So, and everybody, please put your comments as well there. So how much do you think is currently spent on basically of every dollar spent in the United States, what portion goes overseas? So people think that it's now 65, 80, 80, 60, 70, 60, 70. Okay, so most of you think that Americans spend about 80% of every dollar they spend on foreign made goods, but they think it's too much. It should be only about 40% that should be going overseas. Okay. How about China? How much do you think Americans spend on Chinese made goods? From every single dollar we spend on everything, goods and services. What portion do you think goes, like every time I shop, what portion of my spending goes to China? So most believe that, okay, so from 10 to 30 to somebody even says 90% goes to China. And this is why it's such a freaking difficult topic. This is why it's so difficult to talk about it, because you're completely wrong. Like you gave me the answers that are exactly the same that I get every single time from my students. I actually linked some studies there as well. People are so emotional about this. People are so animated about this. People believe that something needs to be done about it. And then when I ask them, if you had the magic wand, what would you do? And they say exactly what you Yukta said. They said, well, we'll send to China 5 cents of every dollar. We'll send overseas 40 cents of every dollar, and we'll keep $40 in the country. You would make it so much worse, because at this time of all the money spent in the United States by American consumers, 88.5% actually stays in the United States. China gets, or for products labeled made in China, it's only 2.7% of every dollar cents, but much of that is transportation and other things. So China actually gets 1.9 cents. So if you guys were in charge, you would send China like 10 times more than we are sending now, and you would send overseas several times more than we are sending now. Because most of the money we spend in the United States is not going to China. Like, for example, I bought this phone several years ago. I don't know when I bought something foreign made or at least substantial before that. So most of my spending is like tuition for my kids' school, housing, construction, cars. My cars are made in the United States. I have a BMW and a Honda, but they're made, one in South Carolina and the other one is in Oklahoma. Repairs, gas, oil, food, all of that is like literally 88.5% of my spending, and all of that is American made. So the only thing that I actually buy from overseas, occasionally I buy some clothing. Again, I forgot when I bought it last time, and it's a small portion of my spending. Occasionally I buy maybe some foods that are from Mexico. Again, relatively small, because most of the food in America is American made. And then occasionally I buy some electronics, but I mean, that's very rare. And that's a small portion of my spending. And so this is why it's so difficult to talk about that, because just like with immigration, people greatly overestimate the real picture. And as I said, if you guys, or my students for that matter, or just about anyone else in the United States, had a magic wand and could do what you believe is right, you would actually make things much worse. And that's what makes it so difficult. So now the question is, why companies send jobs overseas? So basically, why would GM open a factory in Mexico or in China? Why would Dell make computers in, for example, the Philippines and not in the United States? There are two main reasons. One, it's cheaper labor or cheaper materials, or closer. So they sell some products overseas, and it may make sense for them to make those products over there. So just like, for example, as I said, my Honda was made in Oklahoma, my BMW was made in Carolina. And the reason Germans and the Japanese created factories in the United States is because I'm the consumer and it's closer to be here for me instead of making those cars in Japan and China and Germany and ship them to the United States, pay for the transportation, pay import tariffs, pay equally expensive German and Japanese workers. So it's cheaper to make those things in the United States. So let's talk about them separately. So one interesting story, actually, I should have probably not showed the picture before I talked about that. So I came to the United States for the first time in 1999. And I was very, very, very surprised to see that the product I thought cannot be made outside of the United States was actually made in China. And that's like American flags and American, like all these kinds of souvenirs. I was like, how can you make flags, American flags in China? That's like so unpatriotic. And then on the other hand, I was surprised that just about the only product I saw that was actually made in the United States were the chopsticks in a Chinese restaurant. And so that makes sense that they actually made in the United States because, you have a lot of, wood, lumber, timber here. And so why would you ship that stuff all the way from China when you can very cheaply make it in the United States? It's not like someone with a knife, makes them. It's a machine makes it. So the raw material is here. It's cheap. It's fully automated. Somebody just presses the button and the machines make it all day. So I was very surprised about that. But anyway, when companies like when GM moves production of, like, for example, Chevy Silverado, a pickup truck, to Mexico, usually that's because it's cheaper to make it there. That's because labor cost is cheaper, for example, in Mexico. And so they can produce it there for about $3,000 less. So the estimates are that it's about $3,000 in savings for a car made in Mexico compared to the United States. And so they just make it there because it's cheaper so that they have more profits or can sell that car for a lower price and compete with other manufacturers on price, right? So that's the so-called vertical FDI. So when you make it overseas with the goal to bring it back home for a cheaper price. The other reason is flow-through. So many American products are popular overseas, and so are many, for example, German or Japanese or Chinese products are popular in other countries. And so GM at some point, much of the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and even today, for example, such brands as Buick are very popular in China. In fact, much more popular than they are in the United States.
The old symbols are still there. The monuments, the uniforms, even the red flag. But on the streets of today's China, there's a growing number of new icons Mao Zedong never dreamed of, with prestigious names like Rolex, Louis Vuitton, and Buick. That's right, Buick. Look anywhere in China, and there they are. Buick sedans, Buick station wagons, even Buick police cars.
What would Chairman Mao think? 6 decades after the Communist Revolution, China has become the hottest capitalist engine on earth. And ironically, some of the most revered symbols of success in today's China are Cadillac, Buick, and Chevrolet.
In 2007, General Motors sold nearly twice as many Buicks in China as it did in the U.S., more than 330,000. In this part of the world, your grandfather's stodgy old car is actually hip. General Motors may be struggling at home, but it is thriving here.
Growing so fast is not
So GM sells many more Buicks in China than in the United States. And it obviously makes sense to open factories in China for the Chinese market, right? And so that makes perfect sense. It's called horizontal FDI. So that's where you open the facility over there to service that consumer base. Same thing like when McDonald's opens a restaurant in, for example, China or KFC. So again, well, that's because where the customers are. And so nobody would say that horizontal FDI is good for for the host country, I suppose Americans do win when GM, an American company, builds a factory in China to sell cars in China. So this one's relatively easy to discuss. And I don't think many Americans would argue or worry about it. I suppose some wish that the cars were still made in Detroit and sold in China, but they understand it would be too expensive to ship them over there, too expensive to make them here. So when it comes to this vertical FDI, that's where the main concern is. So they basically see it as made in overseas, while it's not made here, so that's a problem. And so here are basically two main views on job outsourcing. So many people see it made in China or made in whatever other country, Mexico, as not made in America, and that's problematic. So they hope or they believe that if it's made overseas, then somebody else gets the job, somebody else gets the salary, somebody else gets the taxes, and so that's bad. But then some people say, well, maybe it's not so bad. If the car made in Mexico is cheaper, why I as a consumer should pay more for an American-made car when I can get a perfectly good car made in Mexico by the same company for a lower price? And so here is how Americans kind of see or hear about these things. Here is an example of an ad, anti-job outsourcing, that Americans often see.
The truth about Dick DeVos and China? September 6th. Finally, Dick DeVos admitted he cut Michigan jobs and created jobs in China. Fact. As president of Amway, he laid off nearly 1,400 Michigan workers. Fact. He invested $200 million in China. Fact. He built a factory there and created thousands of jobs for China. Is that what Michigan needs? Dick DeVos, the more you know, the worse it gets.
So a very grim picture, and here job outsourcing to China is presented as an absolute evil, and basically jobs created in China are problematic for American voters, consumers. Here is an alternative view on the picture. This is a clip from a movie called Outsourced. And so here is an interesting look at the effects of job outsourcing on American consumers.
Thanks. Hello?
You gotta be kidding me. I'm buying a freaking American Eagle from a company that is supposed to be in America, and I get India?
I understand that you're upset, sir.
No, you don't. You don't understand. Last month, I lost my job at the plant where I worked for 22 years because the whole operation moved to Mexico. My brother had to leave town because there are no jobs.
I know how you feel, sir.
No, you don't. You have a job.
Sir, please don't hang up. I have a solution for you.
What?
See, we understand that many Americans are upset about outsourcing, so we have located American-made versions of all our products. If you have a pen, I will give you the website of an American company that makes an eagle statue very similar to ours. Same size, same materials, only theirs is made 100% in America.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it, but is the price about the same?
No, sir. Theirs is $212 more. Sir?
Yeah, all right. Just sell me yours.
Thank you, sir. May I have your credit card number?
So all of a sudden, when it comes to your pockets, so yes, you don't like that the jobs are being outsourced in this specific case to India, but when it comes to price, well, yeah, okay, well, give me yours. Too often, mistakenly, the discussion revolves around it as if America is only factory workers, as if America are only people who work at, for example, GM factories. But the truth is that America is also GM factory owners or stakeholders. I have some shares of GM, so it is in my interest for GM to be more profitable. And if they can make more profits by outsourcing jobs overseas, I guess I, as an investor, win, owners of the company win, but then also I, as a consumer, so I don't drive a GM car. But if I could save some money on Mexico-made GM truck, I guess I, as a consumer, win. And I too am American. So not only the guys in Detroit who makes them or used to make those cars, but also those who buy them now, those who benefit from the profits of this gigantic company. So all of that needs to be looked balanced. So let's move on. And so let me just go here. So when we talk about outsourcing, it seems like most people are concerned about outsourcing to low, sort of cheap countries. So I haven't seen many protests about American companies opening offices in Germany or Japan or France, but everyone's worried about offices being opened or factories being opened in, for example, Mexico or China. Like, for example, Elon Musk is opening a factory, a Tesla factory in Germany. I don't see many protests against that. But then Elon Musk at the same time is opening factories in China, and many people see that as a betrayal. And so the question then is, well, is it a problem that jobs are moving to countries with cheap labor? And so here's an exercise or activity that I play with my students to illustrate a point. Yukta, have you seen the movie called Shallow Hell?
I have seen the movie, yes.
So there is a scene in that movie where Shallow Hell is stuck with Tony Robbins in the elevator, and Tony Robbins does some hypnosis, and Shallow Hell starts seeing only the inner beauty of the women. Well, imagine that Tony Robbins can hypnotize people, and imagine that he looks around, he sees expensive, American economy is not doing particularly well, expensive prices and stuff like that. And so he, being not an economist, he decides to help America by hypnotizing all of China into loving America so much that the Chinese factory workers at Foxconn, so the factory that assembles iPhones, iPads, that they love America so much that they decide to make those phones for free. And so tomorrow they show up for work and they say, you know what, all these iPhones that we will be making for the United States free will work for free. And so they work the whole day for free or the whole month for free. And they pack those phones, iPhones and iPads and MacBooks and whatever else, and they ship it all for free to the United States. So the question is it good for America or bad for America? And same question for everyone. So if Chinese Foxconn workers started making all those iPhones for free and send them to Americans for free, would it be good for America or bad for America? So I, for example, would get a free iPhone and a free MacBook Pro, whatever else they make there. So would that be good for America or bad for America?
Technically, if you look, it's great because for America, because again, the consumer costs have highly reduced, and since there is no production cost now almost, so like it would like pressure.
Don't get too smart here, Yukta. So what if they started sending it to India and you would get a free iPhone every week and a free MacBook Pro every week and your relatives and your friends? Would that be bad for India?
I'm saying it's good for the US. That's what I'm saying.
Good, yeah. So as always, there are a couple of people who said here, like Nicole McKee said decidedly bad, and Diana said bad. Come on, girls. I mean, don't be too smart here. No, it would be wonderful. You'd get a free iPhone. You'd get. Why would that be a bad thing? You save like $1,000 or $1,200. You can use that money to get a new haircut, to repair your car, to paint your house. Why would that be bad? That's great. That's savings. I mean, why would that be bad? Of course it's good. I mean, some people say, well, we will become then so lazy and we will not. Come on. I mean, like, why would you become lazy? You would just make something else, right? So no, it's good. Or at least just like in the comments here, I see like 100 or so people responded and 95% said good. And then there are a couple, like Sean also said it's bad, but otherwise, well, Sean, Americans will not lose jobs because iPhones are made in China. So it's not like there are factories that make iPhones and MacBook Pros in the United States, and now they will not be. No, obviously, so we buy them from China anyway. Just now we will not have to pay, so we'll get them for free. Now, very important, Yukta, listen here to me. So, and that's exactly what I, by the way, hear all the time. Like 95% of the students say it's good. Over time, like a month has passed, and this hypothesis starts sort of fading out. And these Chinese workers say, well, you know what, maybe we don't want to work for Americans completely for free, so we will charge 1 cent for every of those iPhones. So we'll still ship them for nearly free, but, we'll charge 1 cent for every phone. Would that still be good for America?
Even if they're charging a cent, it's still good.
Yeah. Well, but then they become a little bit more greedy and they say, well, we'll charge $1 for every of those iPhones. Will that still be good for America?
$1, even if that's like 100,000 units, still it's good.
Yeah. Well, then they say, the hypothesis wears out, and they're like, well, maybe we're too good. So how about $5 for every of those iPhones? Would that be still good? And then over time they say, well, even 5 is too little. Let's charge them 10 or 50 or 100 or 1,000. And then they actually like, wait a second, we've been shipping that all for free. Let's charge them like 3,000 or 5,000 for each of those units. And so I ask that question of my students, And so what I noticed is that when the price approaches about $1,000 a unit, people say, no, 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 that's not good. That's, that's too much. No, 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 we don't like that anymore. So you know what, screw you. We're going to make them ourselves. And so the point of this exercise is that when you talk about it in these absurd terms, like, obviously nothing like what I just described can happen. But when you talk about it like that, the math sort of reverses. So when I ask my students, what do you think about job outsourcing to like cheap labor countries? Most people say, well, it's bad when it goes to like cheap labor countries. I don't mind when Musk is building a factory in Germany, but I really don't like it when he does it in Mexico or in China because of the cheap labor. And then when we forget about that, and I give this absurd scenario with Tony Robbins, who makes all those million or so Chinese workers make products for free. Most people say, well, free is good. Yeah, I actually don't mind if they work completely for free. Well, I don't even mind if they charge $1 or $5. But then when the price increases, they say, oh, no, 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 now that's not good. Now we don't want to get those from China. And that's kind of funny because when you talk about job outsourcing, usually the math is the opposite. Usually people are worried about cheap labor countries outsourcing and not so much expensive country or outsourcing to expensive labor countries. But when you have these kind of funny scenarios, the math completely changes. And I actually have data from literally now thousands of people that show me that very stuff. So if you frame it as job outsourcing, the more expensive, the more okay people are with it. But when you frame it like one of these hypothetical scenarios, it's the opposite. When it's free, everyone's happy. When it's expensive, people are not happy. Now, here is an interesting story that I want to tell. And this one is actually very interesting. I'm curious. Like, this one is not to make you look sort of, it's really just to discuss. This is an interesting one. So it happened in the 2010s, like 2003 or 4. There was this very interesting case. One guy who lived in California was randomly selected or not randomly selected for audit. And so the IRS, the American Tax Authority, audits this guy. And so they find that he has 7 full-time jobs in the Silicon Valley as a programmer. And so he claims that he works 40 hours for 7 companies and makes like $100,000 from each of those. And so this makes no sense. I mean, like, how many hours in the day does he have? How can he have 4 full-time jobs? So they start investigating, and it turns out the guy didn't have, or he did have 7 jobs, but he didn't do the work of 7 workers. What he did was he was outsourcing his job literally to programmers in India. So he would get the job from his employer, and then he simply hires people in India for about 40% of his pay. And then he ships the task to them. They write the code, he gets it from them, and then submits as his own. And so kind of the irony here is that the employers are happy because they get what they pay for. The guy is happy because he makes like 60% on each of those jobs. So apparently the guys in India are happy they got a job too, so they're paid whatever they negotiated. But then the question is, so is it good for America or bad for America? I mean, like, so what do you guys think here in the comments? And Yukta, what do you think about this? Is this guy good for America or bad for America?
I mean, I don't think that's bad because the employer is paying to this person and this person's paying taxes in US, even if he's sharing some money of certain percentage to India, but it still stays over there. So I don't think that's a problem. It looks like a trade-off to me.
Well, it's a very uncanny story. So when I ask my students, they somewhere deep inside, they kind of feel that this is wrong. Like, this is cheating, this is unpatriotic. But then when I press them to articulate it, they're like, well, I mean, I say, those of them who say, no, that's cheating, the employers. I say, well, he negotiated the task and the pay. He delivers the work, good quality, on time, and gets only what he negotiated in pay. So why is that bad? If anything, he may be perceived as a patriot who saved 7 jobs. I mean, technically, companies could have outsourced on their own. So 7 good paying jobs would leave the United States. Because of this guy, the jobs stay in the United States. So anyway, it's a tricky situation. And as I said, we can argue about it all day long. But everyone feels that something's wrong with it. But at the same time, the math seems to work. Why would it be a problem? So I'll leave it without an answer. So I'll let everyone think about it. But you understand the absurdity. So if I wanted to save every American job at any cost, I guess in a way we would be like this guy. And yet we feel that it's not good for Americans. I guess I, as a consumer, like, if that's the code that is on my phone or on my computer, I guess I would actually prefer that the company outsources it directly to India, save 60%, and then passes on the savings to me, so I don't have to pay this much for my software. So I, as a consumer, would be better off. The company would be better off because the company would also reduce cost and maybe increase profits. I guess the only one who would lose would be this guy, because now he's in the middle, essentially, making money just by being in the middle. But at the same time, is that really, I don't know, I guess it's what we want as consumers, but then job outsourcing, losing jobs to India. I mean, so you see the dilemma, right? So anyway.
Yeah, something.
Now, the true reason, by the way, why most of the jobs or why the number of manufacturing jobs in the United States is lower than it used to be is, well, I'll actually show this maybe. For example, automotive factories these days, the job loss is not because many jobs are moving to Mexico or China, but because robots are replacing humans. Is it bad? Is it good? We can talk about that all day long. But it's very rare where jobs actually move overseas for the reason that, like literally packed here and open there. Most of the time, simply workers are being laid off and partially at least replaced by robots. So Apple is an interesting case. So it's probably one of the baddest outsourcers. So most of the products sold under the Apple brand are actually made overseas. But at the same time, those Apple employees who are in the United States, they generate gigantic profits for the United States or for the company. So pre-pandemic, I couldn't find the latest figures, but pre-pandemic, an average Apple factory earned about $500,000, $400,000 in profits for Apple. Gigantic sums of money. And so Apple outsources everything that it can be outsourced, but they still have thousands, tens of thousands of employees in the United States, mainly in design, engineering, marketing, those kinds of jobs. And those jobs generate gigantic amounts of money for Apple. And so the question is it bad for America or good for America? Same thing with Nike, for example. So Nike does not make shoes in the United States. They make them all over the world. But in the United States, they have tens of thousands of employees, mainly, again, accounting, finance, marketing, transportation, logistics. And so those employees are extremely profitable for the company. And so the question is it good or bad? Would it really be better if Apple was trying to make those computers in the United States? Maybe so. It would have created more jobs, but also it would have made those computers more expensive for us, the consumers, but also perhaps less competitive against, I don't know, Chinese or Japanese or German or whatever other computers. And so isn't it better to have companies that outsource sort of low profitability jobs, but keep the ones that are very high profit margins? I don't know. I mean, there is no simple answer to that. But here is what Tim Cook said about it. And that's very important.
There's a confusion about China that, and let me at least give you my opinion. The popular conception is that companies come to China because of low labor cost. I'm not sure what part of China they go to, but the truth is China stopped being the low labor cost country many years ago. And that is not the reason to come to China from a supply point of view. The reason is because of the skill and the quantity of skill in one location and the type of skill it is. Like the products we do require really advanced tooling. And the precision that you have to have in tooling and working with the materials that we do are state of the art. And the tooling skill is very deep here. You know, in the US, you could have a meeting of tooling engineers, and I'm not sure we could fill the room. In China, you could fill multiple football fields. It's that vocational expertise is very deep, very, very deep here. And I give the education system a lot of credit for continuing to push on that, even when others were de-emphasizing vocational. Now I think many countries in the world have woke up and said, you know, this is a key thing, and we've got to correct that. But China called that right from the beginning.
So this is a very important message, and that gets us back to, well, is job outsourcing always good? Well, I don't know why America lost, at least partially, its manufacturing capabilities? Was it because it just simply was cheaper to outsource to China? And so we thought, okay, let's save money and forget about our manufacturing skills, and over time we lost them. Or is it because China was better to begin with? So, but there is definitely a valid concern that if we outsource everything, over time we will lose that capability. And that's a problem because, you want to have that capability. And so obviously sometimes you don't want to outsource, even if it's cheaper, even if the consumers save the money. So sometimes you need that capability specifically. Well, if something happens, or if tomorrow that capability becomes extremely expensive or valuable, you don't want to lose it, right? So on the one hand, let me share again my screen here. On the one hand, some people will say, well, outsourcing saves us money. Let me share the screen again. Outsourcing saves us money. Outsourcing makes owners of businesses more profitable, makes consumers better off. And if I save money on one product, I guess I have that money to spend on something else and create jobs in the United States. But then the question could be, so why do we hear so much about the losses and so little about the gains? Why, for example, it's very possible to see a picture that NAFTA kills jobs, but why it's not likely to see a picture that I saved, well, I guess not 5,000 of my Mexican-made Chevy Silverado. And the reason for that is that, well, losses always loom larger than gains. If I had a job and my job went overseas, obviously I will be very, very vocal about that. But if I buy a car that was made in Mexico and save a few $1,000s, I don't think I would be so excited about that I would take it to the streets. And so you will never hear about that saving, even though that's sort of equally important, equally important economic effect. But sometimes it is totally justifiable to try to curb outsourcing, despite all of the many possible benefits. So let me ask again, everyone. So I go back to Nicole, Sean, and others who seem to be anti-outsourcing, and probably for a good reason. And Yukta, I'll ask you that same thing. So why would you, or when would it make sense to protect your own industry, to protect your own workers by maybe imposing import tariffs or some other constraints on imports or restrictions on imports? When would it make sense? When would you do that? Oh, Nicole says that she's pro outsourcing. That's fine. Yeah. So, but anyway, definitely, sometimes it makes total sense to ban imports or to impose import tariffs. The question is, when would it make sense?
Let's say if I'm saying that the localites, like in my country, there is a higher unemployment. So I would stop doing that because I need to cater to the people in my country. And that should be one primary reason to go ahead with that. Then you can look at other possibilities like under the strategies or the economics and the big concepts that people talk about. Yeah, but employment on one factor we do consider.
Fair enough. So there are many reasons, also other reasons. So I guess you say you're protecting jobs, and we'll talk about in a second if banning imports protects jobs. But so one reason, I'll show you this one. So one, obviously, I guess that goes back to what Tim Cook was talking about. So again, sorry that I'm picking on India today, but no, you cannot outsource your homework to India. So I wouldn't let my kids, for example, hire people in other countries to do their homework. It's not because it's not cheaper. It's not because they cannot make homework, do homework better than my kids could do on their own. But I want my kids to have that capability, to have that skill. And if they outsource their homework, they will never learn how to do, for example, math or whatever other homework they do. And so I want them to do it so that they can do it. But also this one obviously is a joke, but there are more serious reasons too. Like, for example, it is generally considered that it's not a bad idea to ban imports on products in so-called infant industries. So if we are trying to develop capabilities to make, I don't know, electric vehicles or, solar panels, at this time, China makes more of those than the rest of the world combined. And so the idea here is that if we want to develop the capability to make these new products, as I said, I don't know, solar batteries, for example, if we do not protect our own manufacturers by imposing import tariffs on foreign-made goods, then our manufacturers will never develop that capability because Chinese products are already cheaper and often better. And so the consumers will just buy Chinese products. And so our factories will have no chance to sort of mature and become competitive. And so when you deal with so-called infant industries, it makes sense to protect those infants, just like we protect the kids until they mature enough where they can compete on their own. Same thing when it goes to restructuring. So, for example, in 2009, GM and Chrysler went through bankruptcy, and Ford was almost, it was on the brink of bankruptcy. And at that time, there were some protective measures in place specifically to help these companies for a while, for a short while they're going through restructuring, because if they didn't get that help, then foreigners would have taken over the US market, and it would be very, very difficult for American companies then regain strength and become more competitive. Also, sometimes it could be as a sort of geopolitical influence tool or temporary pressure to renegotiate deals. Again, sometimes some countries may engage in sort of strategic price dumping and other types of tactics that are not always fair or not always in the interest of your country. And so you don't want to protect your products forever, but for a while you might want to impose import tariffs, for example, on foreign-made goods until you renegotiate fairer terms, or perhaps force them to start playing fairly. Because again, if the government there subsidizes their manufacturers and you don't do it in your country, then obviously your product becomes more expensive comparatively. And so if the foreign government does it for a while, your company may go out of business, and then the foreigner comes as a monopoly, jacks up the prices, and so that's not fair either. Now, the only thing is that you need to remember, this is extremely important, you need to remember that it's very, very costly. I'll talk about several examples here. Actually, let me stop sharing. I'll ask you, Yukta, but also ask everyone. So we've seen attempts to save American jobs by imposing import tariffs on several products. So Obama was trying to deal with Chinese tires, imports of Chinese tires. President Trump, when he was his first term, he was doing the same with washing machines and some other electronics. And then before that, we go all the way back to Bill Clinton, who was dealing with Japanese steel by imposing steel tariffs or tariffs on steel from Japan. And then Biden kept many of the Trump's tariffs during his term. And so, yes, jobs have been saved because the Chinese or whatever Japanese products before that were made more expensive. And so we know how many jobs were saved that would have been lost otherwise because consumers would have bought the cheap products. The question for you, Yukta, is, and for everyone, how much did a saved job cost to the United States, to American consumers? So when you calculate by how much, how many fewer American and Chinese tires or tires under Obama, or washing machines under Trump, or steel under Clinton was bought and made and bought from the United States as opposed to from China. So we can calculate how much more American consumers paid for those products, and then calculate how much was the cost of saving one American job. What do you think was that cost, Yukta? I'll show you the figures. So these are acceptable.
You're asking in billions or like 100,000, or like on per person?
So these are known figures and remarkably consistent all the way from Clinton and Bush era all the way to Obama and Trump and now Biden. So for the tire tariffs, it was about $926,000 per year per job saved. So Americans paid more for tires because of the tariffs. I have some calculations here. Yeah, so we have some calculations. So approximately $1,200 jobs in the United States were saved because consumers essentially were forced, or American tires were made more attractive because of tariffs. But the cost of one saved job per year was $926,000. And so I have some more calculations here. So then when we go to steel tariffs, one job saved was, where's the figure? 100 and maybe on the next page, $900,000 here. So that was $900,000 per saved job. When you go to Trump's era, so again, don't accuse me of being partisan here because it's the same story no matter if it's a Democratic president or Republican president. But so the washing machines, Trump's tariffs, $815,000 for every job. And so the question then becomes, is this really good for America? Maybe it is. Maybe we want to keep that capability as we discussed, or maybe it's too expensive. I, as a consumer, had to pay for it, and this is how much it was. It would have been literally cheaper just to give each of those employees, let's say, $100,000 so that they don't have to work, or they use that money to go and retrain, than to impose the import tariffs, charge more, because tariffs are essentially a tax, and that makes products more expensive. And as a result, American consumers subsidize those jobs at this level. So you have to be cognizant of this true, very high cost before you start saving jobs, because the cost may be unacceptably low once you know how much it is. Obviously, there is also national security, and this is very important. So as I said, can we afford to make the product here in the United States? Can we afford the high cost of American labor? Well, the alternative question is, can we afford not to make them in the United States? Can we afford to outsource to foreigners making of our whatever the strategically important product is? Maybe we should be paying more, but retain that capability, because otherwise we become dependent on foreign whatever goods made. And so, yeah, I guess I'll stop here. We have a few minutes for questions. So, yes, and somebody, by the way, here I see in comments were saying that the cost of savings was $100,000 per employee, but the truth is, no, it's closer to $800,000 to $900,000. Yeah. So good comments, Enrica and Tayeba, but no, it was much more. Anyway, so let's see if we have any questions. You can raise your hands in Q&A, or you can raise your really hand and we can add you to allow you to
have a few questions over here, I think. There is one person who has asked question. Here, sir, the numbers with made in US, China were surprising. Can you give your opinion on what should be ideal numbers for all the three parameters?
Oh, so you mean what should be the ideal number? Well, I don't know. I mean, the point of this exercise was not to say what should be the ideal number. I guess it depends greatly on the country, on the economy type, on what's being bought, what's being sold. Remember that we're talking about trade, not one-sided sort of shipment. So America and China, so it's not only America buys products from China, America sells a lot of products to China. On balance, it's a little bit more of stuff going from China to the US than the other way around, but still there is a lot of stuff going from the US to China. So it seems to me like what we have now seems to work. I assume I wouldn't change it too much. So I don't mind buying some products overseas. As I said, I like Italian wine. I like, I don't know, Korean phones, and I'd like to retain that capability. But ultimately, as I said, it's not so much about what portion, it's about, like how the trade balance works. So as long as we buy a lot and sell a lot, I suppose the actual percentage is not as critical. So the problem becomes when it's a trade deficit. So where we buy much more than we sell, or the other way around, that's where problems sort of become more problematic.
That is something everyone should take a note of as well. Also, there's another question that talks about, given that tariffs can support industries in short term, how can the US balance these temporary protections with long-term goal of a competitive free market economy? That's the first part. Are there specific indicators or conditions to watch for when deciding to lift or reduce these tariffs, and the effect of this on America?
Yeah. So I think it's a question from Laiba. So I would like to go to one specific word you used in that question one more time. You said support industries.
Yes.
So let's go back and think one more time, support, like who wins and who loses. So who wins? If we impose an import tariff, clearly workers of the factories that make the product in the United States, they win, because the foreign made product becomes more expensive because of the import tariff. So we have few hundred people, maybe a few thousand people who definitely win. Owners of the American factories win, because again, the owners of foreign companies have it harder to sell products in the United States because of the import tariff. So I, as an owner of a factory in the United States whose competitor is being taxed, obviously my profits improve. So I'm happy about that. So that's like another 10 people or 5 people or more if it's a publicly traded company, but each of them owns a very small portion. Who loses? Well, American consumers, like if I want to buy this product, obviously import tariff is essentially a tax on the product. And so just like tax adds to the price, so does the import tariff. And so in this case, I, as a consumer, I lose. Essentially what the government says to me is, I don't trust you. I don't trust that when you see 2 products in the store, one American made, one foreign made, that you will make the right choice. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to increase this Chinese-made products price higher so that you favor this, I guess, American-made product. So, well, as a consumer, I don't like government making the choice for me. I'd like to be able to choose for myself, and I may well choose the cheaper Chinese product so that I save that money and I use it on something else. As I said, to hire an American mechanic to fix my car, to get a proper haircut, to get a massage, to hire an American painter to paint my house or something like that. So tricky. And so when and how, as I said, sometimes it is strategically advantageous for you to still make the product in the United States. It could be maybe some sort of like if you believe that computer chips are important for your strategic advantage in the future. So even if China learns how to make them, I still want to have those NVIDIA factories in the United States, or Intel factories, or AMD factories in the United States. Even if I can make them cheaper overseas, I want to be able to make my own chips, because Taiwan will say one day, oh, sorry, we can't make enough of those. And all of a sudden you have all this problem. I probably want to keep making my own food. So many European countries subsidize farmers, even though they can buy that food cheaper from whatever countries, from Ukraine, from Russia, from Mexico, but they keep subsidizing German and French farmers. And one of the reasons could be, well, yes, it's twice as expensive to make that bread in Germany, but we want to be able to keep making our own food, because tomorrow, what if we have a war with, for example, Russia, and they stop sending grains? Are we going to starve? No, we want to keep our own farmers, even if it costs us more money. So it makes total sense. Plus, as I said, we discover, for example, that maybe solar panels or whatever else is important for our future. And so again, yeah, China makes them very well, cheaply. But yeah, maybe we want to develop our own capability, because, otherwise, if we don't subsidize our own, manufacturers of solar panels, we will never learn how to make it, because Chinese will come and basically take the market. So then it makes kind of sense to impose import tariffs or subsidize your own manufacturers.
But to understand this point, there's another question also around the same points, that given the fact that US has been into the technology space and a service-oriented economy, so would it be necessary to refocus on manufacturing, especially given that now when America does that, the high cost would be accompanied with it?
Well, so one important thing is that the manufacturing jobs are actually growing, and production is growing actually pretty fast. So the important thing here is to understand also that manufacturing does not need to depend on the cost of labor. I mean, there is still much labor, but lately we see more and more industrial robots. And I showed you the video of how cars are made. In fact, my hobby is visiting production factories. So I worked for a while but with Volkswagen in Germany. So I was an intern there for a year. I had a joint venture with a BMW dealer. So I visited just about every car manufacturing factory, from Toyota and Mercedes and BMW to like more exotic places like JCB. They make tractors like John Deere. And so I've seen those factories. And so no longer we are in the time when there is a guy with a wrench that attaches there are still some people there, but much of that is automated. Much of that is robots. And so running a robot in the United States is not more expensive than running a robot in China. As I said, like forklift drivers probably still have to be humans, but maybe not for long. And so now the cost of like making a car, for example, or making a phone, in that cost, the labor cost is not that much anymore. And so, yes, Drew, we know we will finish on time. No worries. So he probably doesn't hear us. Drew, we know we will be done in 1 minute. So, but the point here is that manufacturing is less and less contingent or dependent on labor cost, because labor costs share within total price of product is actually rapidly shrinking because of automation. All right.
All right.
So let's stop here. Hopefully you learned something new, and hopefully you've seen both pros and cons of job outsourcing. Thank you, everyone, and let's stop here.